Hi, this is Sam Reeve. We are going to start the webinar in about 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. This is Sam Reeve. We are about to start the webinar. I'll give you 1 more minute to allow people to come in. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion, Managing People During a Crisis. My name's Sam Reeve, and I'll be one of your hosts today. I'm the CEO and founder of CompTeam, and excited to bring you this session. We also have today Shar Miller, people strategist and founder of HR with a Heart, and Debbie Cernak, founder and CEO of HR Cert Prep Pros. I'm also pleased to introduce to you today's panel. We have Dr. Patty Ann of Relationship Toolbox, Laurel Davies of HR Preneur, Lisa Jackson of Corporate Culture Pros, and then finally we'll have a session that completes with Amy Hartman, which she's going of Hartman Employment Law Practice. She's going to update us on everything that is going on out there. So you'll be able to see and review everybody's extensive experience in their bios and so forth on the CompTeam website. And also within this presentation, you can download that. So I know that we're going through this quite quickly at this point. This panel is a weekly series of discussions that CompTeam and HR Cert Prep Pros will be hosting during the COVID-19 outbreak to help small to medium-sized businesses during the pandemic. And so before I hand over the mic to the panel, I have a few housekeeping issues I want to go through. First, today's discussion will be available on demand after the live session at compteam.net. We'll also have some added resources there, some attachments to help with some resources that will help you with the outbreak and so forth. And then on the website, you will also find the link to the next free webinar, which will be on Wednesday at the same time. I'll send out a registration link to ensure that everybody gets that. Also, we would love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have a question for one of our speakers, feel free to send it in at any time using that Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. That'll give an opportunity for the presenters to see what your question is and answer it on the fly. Or if your answer doesn't get answered during the presentation, we'll follow up with you after the webinar to ensure that that is addressed. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share what you've experienced here on the social networks to make sure that we're able to help other companies. And so without any further ado, let's kick things off to the panel here. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Patty Ann, and she's going to talk about managing anxiety during the pandemic. Patty?
Thank you so much, Sam. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Patty Ann Tublin, as Sam just mentioned, and I'm CEO and founder of Relationship Toolbox, LLC, which is a coaching, consulting, and professional boutique speaking firm. I am so delighted and honored to be a part of this HR forum call during these incredibly difficult times. When Sam and Tar reached out and asked me to speak, I was so excited and delighted to join you today. And I thought to myself, what's the best information that I can provide you now, where I can give you some really valuable information that's and useful that you can use right after we have this call. So I thought for a while, and I reached into my 30+ experience as a professional steering coach and consulting who has traveled the world, sharing my relationship tips and my expertise as a communication, relationship, and emotional intelligence expert. And I came up with today's presentation I thought would be really valuable for you as an HR executive and a business entrepreneur. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you a little bit of an understanding as to anxiety that we are all facing today during this crisis. Here's what's really important to know. Anxiety during any time of change is normal, natural, and healthy, right? One of the reasons why people naturally don't like change is because it makes us anxious. And who wants to feel anxious? And when the coronavirus thrusts this change upon us, the speed of the change really increases our anxiety. Now, anxiety in and of itself is not bad. As a matter of fact, anxiety has a lot of positive benefits to it, because what it does is it motivates our behavior to perform. So think about it for a moment. When you were a kid and you would have a test in school, you would get a little anxious. And therefore, that anxiety would create behavior in you and cause you to study. If you're an athlete, you get nervous, anxious before an event. So what does that do? That makes you practice, the same as if you're a musician. If you're in business and you're about to go out on a sales call, it makes you a little anxious, so you prep. So anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's actually very healthy. But let me explain to you what's going on with the coronavirus, where the anxiety has gotten out of control. And then I'm going to share with you 3 simple and yet very powerful tips that you can use to decrease your anxiety during this pandemic, and you'll be able to put it into action. And do not underestimate the power of simplicity. So here's what's going on for everybody. Anxiety left unchecked, rapidly evolves into fear. And when you think about the emotion of fear, fear is an emotion that is future oriented. We are afraid of what's coming down the pike. We are afraid of the unknown. So think about fear as an acronym that stands for F is false, E is evidence, A is accepted, and R as real. So what's happening during the pandemic now is the anxiety has gone left unchecked, and it has evolved or devolved into fear, where there's false information that everybody thinks is real. That fear then rapidly devolves into panic. And that's what we're seeing today during the pandemic. So here's what happens. We go into the grocery store, and there's an entire aisle that's normally stockpiled high, and it's totally empty. We cannot find toilet paper. We can't find Lysol. We can't find hand wipes, and there's no chicken. we're already a little anxious, we're a little afraid, we see that, we panic, and then a vicious cycle is created. But here's what's going on. It's not that we don't have the toilet paper or the chicken or the hand wipes. It's that people are hoarding them. So the 5 people that got to the aisle before you took a year's supply of all that stuff, if you will, and then we're left with nothing. But it feeds into the anxiety that there's a shortage of food, everything's out of control, the world is coming to an end. That's the state that everybody is in today. And that's why everybody is so outrageously anxious. So I think it's important that you understand that how we got to where we are with the anxiety, because in a lot of ways it's unprecedented. And anxiety makes us so uncomfortable. So what I'd like to share with you now are 3 tools that you can use that will undeniably decrease your anxiety. And here's the first one. During these crazy times, there are so many things about the corona pandemic that we cannot control. There's no denying that. And I am not going to minimize the things that are out of our control. However, what we need to do is tip number 1, control what you can control. Now, what do I mean by that? The most important thing that we need to control during this crisis is the very thing that we can control, and that's the good news. And that is our mindset. Nobody can tell you how you should look at this pandemic, how you should feel about it, what your attitude can be. You are the only one that creates your mindset, and you have a choice. You can look at this pandemic as Armageddon and the sky is falling and the world is coming to an end. And some people have made. However, I would suggest, in my opinion, that having the lights, having food, being able to get on this webinar to your internet, I don't think how Armageddon looks. That's just my guess. Or you have the choice to look at this and think, wow, these are challenging times. There's no denying it. How can I make these challenging times work for me? Will I allow it to defeat me, or will I allow it to expand my horizon and to look at things through a different lens? If you take the mindset that this is Armageddon, you will have your head in the sand and you will act as if the world is coming to an end. You will feel as if you have no control over anything. The coronavirus has taken over your life, it has taken over your thoughts, and therefore it determines your action, because your mindset will determine your decisions, your choices. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But your energy will go where your thoughts flow. So you have a choice. You can look at this as a challenge for, what can I do differently now? Let's embrace this as an opportunity for change. Maya Angelou said that I may not be able to control all the changes happening around me. And that applies for today. However, I refuse to be reduced by it. So you can make a mindset where you can grow from this. You can expand. You can see this as an opportunity for, how can I challenge what was the status quo and come out bigger, better, stronger? Different? Absolutely different. We are back to what we were before. This is a paradigm shift that will absolutely transform every aspect of your personal and your professional life. But change doesn't mean bad. It just means different. So create a mindset where you are evolving and emerging. Because the fact of the matter is that crises has created some of the best opportunities if you're willing to look for them. During the Great Fires of London, they said that Albert Camus wrote the book, no, I'm sorry, during the bubonic plague, Camus wrote The Plague. During the Great Fires of London, literary scholars pretty much believe that Shakespeare wrote some of his great works. And during the fires of London also, they believe that Isaac Newton created the theories that literally revolutionized the way we think of how the world spins. So this is an opportunity if you have the mindset to look at it that way. Let's fast forward to today. In the year 2000, we had Y2K. If you remember that, we thought the world was coming to an end. And then we had AIDS, and then we had MRSA, and then we had SARS. Now we have COVID-19. Yes, this is a little different because the speed is huge, but with the speed comes an incredible opportunity to change, because a crisis forces us to do things differently. It forces us to reprioritize how we live our lives and how we do our work. This is an opportunity if you use your mindset to see it as such. If anyone read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, it is a classic. I absolutely encourage you to read it. It's a short book. And in that book, Viktor Frankl talked about who survived the concentration camp, because everybody in the concentration camp was in the same horrific environment. Like we're in the same environment now. They were all in the same environment. And what he discovered was the people that created the mindset for the will to live, the desire to come out of it alive, then made choices that in fact allowed them to live in the face of the worst of humanity. So I would caution, I would urge you to think about that and to have a positive mindset that only you can control. That's the first thing, that when you realize you have control over the most important thing of control that you can control, your mindset, that in and of itself should decrease your anxiety. The second tool that will absolutely help you decrease anxiety is to, I urge you, limit the amount of time that you expose yourself to information about the coronavirus. We live in a 24/7 news media cycle. We have TV that's 24/7, a gazillion cables, the channels that we could tune into. We have podcasts, we have webinars, we have so much information out there that what happens to us is we become overwhelmed. There's a concept of we become flooded with information. And sometimes knowledge is power, but too much knowledge, too much information just feeds into our fear, right? And the news media, what sells is fear. So they're not going to focus on the positive. They're going to focus on the negative, to keep you tuned in, to get you addicted to that fear, that anxiety. So what I strongly suggest is limit the amount of time you expose yourself to the news. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be aware of what's going on. As a business leader, as a business owner, as a parent, as a member of the community, you have to be informed. You must be able to educate yourself. But you don't need to be glued to the news every hour on the hour. It will not serve you well. It will not be productive. It will only increase your anxiety. Very important. Now, simultaneous with limiting how much time you expose yourself to the media, just as importantly is get your information only from reliable sources. For the ladies on the call or the men on the call that ever had a partner who was pregnant, do you remember that when you were pregnant, all of a sudden, everybody was an expert on pregnancy, right? The guy next door who was a butcher was an expert on pregnancy. And then you had a baby. And all of a sudden, everybody is an expert in child psychology. And then you rapidly learned that, you know what? They really don't know any more than us. That's what's going on today in the media with the coronavirus. So the reliable source that I would recommend is two. One is get your information from the CDC. They are the ones that will give you the most accurate, honest information. Nobody else has a filter, so information can just come out to you. And also listen to Dr. Tony Fauci, right? So those two people are the people that I would listen to when it comes to information on COVID-19. Everybody else is just giving you their noise, and that will absolutely, unequivocally increase your anxiety. So I urge you, limit the amount of time you expose yourself to the TV, to the radio, to the podcast, all the so-called experts. Only listen to the CDC and Dr. Fauci. That will really serve a purpose of decreasing your anxiety, and you won't be so fearful or panicked. That's the second tool. The third tool absolutely falls after the first one, which was create a positive mindset. What you need to do, and this again will allow you to do something, right? Because when we don't do anything, we feel helpless. It increases the anxiety and the fear. Look for the opportunity. Look for the silver lining. There is always a silver lining. There is always an opportunity. I shared with you earlier about Shakespeare and Isaac Newton and some of the best playwrights, all born in crisis, in horrible times. Some of the best companies in the world that we know of today were born during a crisis, including the apps, actually the internet. So but if you're not looking for the opportunity, if you're not looking at this as an opportunity to say, how can I come out of this better? What's the opportunity? What will the future of work look like? What will the future of education look like? How can I recreate, reinvent my work and my life so I can be a thought leader going forward? If you remember, before Uber, nobody would have thought that the taxi cab industry would have been disrupted the way it was prior to Uber. Now we all know it. It's like, of course. Well, you now have the opportunity during this crisis to reevaluate how you work, what you want your work to look like, anticipate the future of work, and then start to create a formula, a process, a game plan that will allow you to lead the charge. Nothing is staying the same. And the way you do that is get your people around you. We're all experiencing the same thing, but everybody will have a different perspective on it. That difference of perspective will be where your genius will be found. You're a diamond in the rough now. Access your resources. They will look at things differently. Imagine what your company would look like if you were creating it today with the knowledge you have now, but it never existed before. What would it look like?
So Dr. Fadian, so just real quick, we have a question right around that particular topic there.
Okay.
And you mentioned evolution and how companies can evolve, and you were just talking about trying to find out what companies should do for that next step. And so, but the big problem is that a lot of our employees right now are super anxious. So what can managers do to really redirect their outlook to look into that evolution or that next step in their business?
Okay, great question. Thank you for asking it. So what the managers need to do first and foremost is the managers must make sure that they have their emotions under control. So if you have employees that are anxious and you are trying to guide them, if you present to them in an anxious manner, you will only raise their anxiety. So first and foremost, every manager, every leader on this call has to be aware of what they are feeling, especially if it's anxiety or fear, and get it under control. And there's many techniques for that, which we don't have time for right now, but I can talk about that a little bit later. Absolutely deep breathing, but they need to be aware of what they're feeling and then acknowledge what their employees are feeling. Acknowledge these are difficult times. Everybody's feeling anxious, right? So first be with them, join them. There's a concept of holding them, hold their emotion, and then let them know, as the wise King Solomon said, this too shall pass.
So there's the other perspective of just having managers interacting and having that relationship with their direct reports and their employees and so forth. But what should leadership be doing as far as right now to alleviate some of this anxiety in their companies?
Okay, so what leadership needs to be doing is they absolutely be able to manage their own emotions. They need to educate themselves on what is going on with the coronavirus. As a leader, you should know. And then they need to make sure that their voice is different than everybody else's. As a leader, when you are communicating, you should be above the crowd, right? Because leaders want people now during a crisis want to be able to look at the leader as someone that will provide them with comfort and that will be visionary, someone that will take them out of this crisis and lead them forward. Very, very important. So what a leader needs to do is to let their people know that we are moving forward. We will be transformed. Acknowledge that we will be transformed. Now, let's speak about what that will look like. What do you think? Like, ask them to engage in that. What they think they can bring to the table, what their vision is, what will look different. Very, very important to let everybody know you understand this is a crisis, you are in transforming, your role might look different, but what do you think you can do to contribute going forward? The other thing, very important, is make sure that you are communicating judiciously. We have a lot of communication out there. We don't need more communication. We need wise communication. So when they get your email or they hear your all hands on deck call, they will say, oh, there will be something wise that is going to be communicated to me now.
Thank you, Dr. Patty Ann. I tend to see this as being the light in the storm, being the lighthouse, and through all the murky waters, and also just thinking of option A, option B, option C. What could the vision look like through uncertain times? So thank you. And you're right. I personally have dealt with that anxiety component and trying to get that under control so I can help everyone see through this.
Exactly. And it's what your piece, and I worked so much with this, you need to be the calm in the eye of the storm. And in fact, that's what a leader does. You know, a crisis doesn't make a leader, it reveals it. And that's also tied into my work with emotional intelligence, right? You have to have high emotional intelligence. You need to be able to manage your emotions, be able to control them so that you can understand what other people's emotions are and be able to help manage that as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That was very informative and got a lot of good information out of there. Thank you, Dr. Patty Ann. So,
okay, so before we stop, if that's all the time we have, which was pretty much covered everything, right? We understand you don't want anxiety to go on. The 3 tools to de-sit, right? Create a positive mindset, right? Limit the amount of time you watch the news and where you get your news, and then look for the opportunity. And unfortunately, there's so much more I have to share with you. But if this resonated with you in any way, then I would encourage you to, I think there's a slide there where I'll be having a complimentary call next Tuesday. And I would encourage you to go on the link. I don't think it's this, another site. Sign up that complimentary call because I'll be talking about anxiety of the coronavirus and its influence on business leadership. And if you can't make the call, that's okay. We'll record it. And I also have a link here on, you can also link in with me on LinkedIn, where I have a great article that I think you'll find helpful.
Great.
So hopefully take this information and put it into practice.
Perfect. And we'll also have your link on the CompTeam website when we post this, the recording and also the slides. You can get to Patty Ann's website or her LinkedIn through that source as well. So thank you, Dr. Patty Ann. That was great.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to turn things over to Laurel Davies. He's going to talk to us about business continuity and planning for the pandemic. Laurel?
Thank you, Sam, and good morning, everyone. My name is Laurel Davies. I have a consulting practice called Preneur, specializing in building and enhancing HR programs and practices to be more efficient, effective, and compliant. Let's jump in. After the St. Vrain River flooded Longmont, Lyons, and Jamestown in 2013, Governor Hickenlooper realized the state wasn't prepared. He ordered all state agencies to develop a business continuity plan to address a range of emergencies and disasters, including floods, fires, storms, and power outages. I was called on to draft the business continuity plan for the Colorado Department of Education. The result was a 2-inch thick binder. That is not what we're going to talk about today. Faced with the pandemic, there is no time to build a comprehensive plan. You have to respond quickly. I will give you a framework today that will allow you to create a timely response to Corona. It involves determining a range of threat scenarios, planning how your key services and products can be continued, and making sure your organization is viable on the back end. These, go the other way, Debbie. These are the critical elements of an effective business continuity plan. Can you move forward, Debbie? I don't know if you... There we go. We will cover each phase in more detail. During a fast-moving crisis, the tendency is to start implementing before actually having a real plan. Ultimately, it will be more efficient and lead to a better outcome if you conduct a risk assessment in advance and analyze the potential impact to the business. Then you'll be ready to develop a business continuity plan and prepare for a smooth recovery. Next slide, please. The mission, values, and goals of your organization can help guide your decisions during this crisis. I've heard some very lively discussions lately whether the #1 goal is to protect health and safety of employees or keep the business viable. That would be a great Zoom polling question, actually. But those goals aren't mutually exclusive. They can coexist, and it's always a balance of hearts and minds. So let's look at the idea of having a pandemic response team. Your management team is responsible for developing the game plan and coordinating your organization's response. It should be, well, there we go. It should be a collaborative effort with everyone bringing information and a unique perspective to the table. Roles and responsibilities should be assigned in advance. The team starts with executive management. There are a lot of decisions to be made. It takes courage to forge ahead during such uncertainty. The challenge of Corona will make strong and more resilient leaders. Moving clockwise, the core team should include several people for operations. Their job is to keep things humming. During the pandemic, Human impacts are a major part of the conversation. Employees will look to human resources for answers and support. HR is responsible for handling all healthcare related issues, including sickness, benefits, perhaps a revision of leave policies. They will also offer advice on how to implement a reduction of hours, a layoff, or furlough if that becomes necessary. Then we have the customer service or sales team, which will focus on customers and business partners. Finance and accounting can provide a reality check on different revenue and budget scenarios during a disaster. And then, of course, we have been relying heavily upon IT, especially to set up the infrastructure for work at home. You can invite other key players as appropriate for your business. Risk assessment. A risk assessment helps identify vulnerabilities and threats to the business. It's actually a good thing Dr. Patty Ann is with us today, because it can create anxiety to imagine what disasters could be coming your way. On the other hand, planning ahead can be a huge stress reliever. These are some of the disruption scenarios currently being discussed around the world relating to Corona. Workplace absenteeism could be extreme due to illness or strict public health interventions. Many of you have already activated a reduced staff model and work from home initiatives. Essential businesses are being called on to ramp up production and services, and at the same time, they face absenteeism and hiring challenges themselves. We are seeing canceled orders, a reduction in customer demand, and an inability to meet client needs. Those lost sales will hit the bottom line pretty heavily, and many companies, as you know, are currently operating at a loss. Supply chain disruption is an escalating issue for many businesses. We are battling huge supply chain issues. Unfortunately, non-essential businesses are shutting down every single day. As part of your risk assessment, it's important to consider that your company may be required to close your doors. Moving on to the business impact analysis. Once the threats have been identified, you can move on to this phase. And the purpose is to identify those functions and processes that are most critical to your company's livelihood. Walk through each potential threat that we talked about just before this, evaluate how it might impact your core business, and ask a lot of questions. What are the financial consequences if operations were to be disrupted? Think about your key resources and infrastructure. That would include identifying the people who are crucial to supporting essential business functions. Is there an alternate way to perform these functions? How long can we operate with existing supplies and materials? Once you've compiled the results from the business impact analysis, the next step is to integrate all of this into your business continuity plan, with the idea of maintaining critical operations for as long as possible. The goal of an incident response plan is to minimize any negative effects to operations as a result of Corona. It's all about developing and documenting procedures that will allow you to return to performing critical functions after an interruption. This is an expedited version of a business continuity plan. As I said earlier, it's not necessary to create a comprehensive plan, but it is important to document your thought process. This is page 1 of a spreadsheet that I created to help drive the conversation. It captures action items, who's responsible, and date completed. It includes topics like cross-training, communications, and alternate suppliers. You will receive a copy of this presentation so you can take a closer look at your convenience. As each member of the pandemic team works on control measures to close any vulnerability gaps, they can make updates on a shared drive, but I want to encourage you to keep access limited. Your business continuity plan should be treated as a confidential document because it exposes all your vulnerabilities. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by an office administrator for an eye clinic with 80 employees. They were planning to lay off 75% of their staff and had a number of questions regarding unemployment. They had already implemented pandemic policies relating to sanitation, distancing, taking temperatures of employees and patients. And we got to talking, and the doctors and administrator started brainstorming alternatives to a massive layoff. The next day, all employees were given an option to take 1 month of unpaid leave. 18 employees selected that option. Then all other staff members were reduced to 24 hours a week. And that 60% schedule made them eligible for the work share program, and unemployment will pay them an additional 26% to bring them to 86% of their pay. Once the dust settles from Corona, this spreadsheet and the associated documents will serve as the framework for other disaster preparations, such as flood, power outage, fire, or storm. A best practice is to prepare a notebook with all the resources. And in addition to the overall plan, you can set up separate tabs for each department, or you can organize it by type of disaster. And as you create your business continuity plan, choose flexible options, flexible solutions that cover a wide range of events. And once you do build your more comprehensive plan, I recommend maintaining both a hard copy and electronic copy. In the event you can't gain access to your facilities, the electronic version can be used. And then if your servers are compromised, the hard copy becomes very valuable. Sam, let's pause here for a moment to see if there's any questions.
Absolutely, there are some questions, but one thing I just wanted to point out, though, is to make clear, is that this is just, when we're looking at this business continuity plan, this what you are showing in the presentation here is just a fraction of the plans that you have in place. So if anybody out there is looking for something that's specific to your business, to reach out to Laurel. Okay, so we have one question that came in. Is it too late to create a business continuity plan? Or now that we're in the midst of it?
It's not too late. This framework will serve you well, no matter where you are in the business continuity process. I was listening to a webinar recently and heard an author Ash quote, and it was, "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." I really think that's appropriate here. It's much better to be in proactive mode versus a reactive mode. And then when the dust settles from the pandemic, it would be easy to say, wow, glad that's over, let's move on. But I do recommend taking the time to document your past activities, your decisions, and lessons learned, and your organization will be stronger for it.
Right. I just want to mention, I call it business sustainability plan, at least in my world. Have you seen, like, for example, my company, since we can no longer interact with the public and offer the services that we provided, we now are looking at a completely related to healthcare, but a completely different type of model that's more virtual. So have you seen, Laurel, where your complete business model has even changed its entire product or services during that rapid transition?
Absolutely. This is a time for innovation. People are totally revamping their business model and for their products and services. And those who do that will come out in better shape once we get to the end of this crisis. And, so that is definitely what's happening out there. And even just the people working from home, all of a sudden, I've heard that 50% of the CEOs are saying, hey, this is a good model. It saves us money on real estate. And so things like that are changing fast.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Yeah.
I have one other question. This pandemic has really changed the face of business. What things do we expect are not going to return to normal, or what should businesses be doing now that they haven't been doing in the past?
I think of it as, think from the end. Visualize where you want your business to be in the new world, and then back up from there and take the steps and the actions that you have to do to get there. It will be a new world, and it's amazing that it's happening so fast. And in HR and as leaders, we all talk about behavioral change. This event is huge for behavioral change.
And one last question here before we move on. There are so many possible risk scenarios. How do you plan for all of them? Is there a way that you prioritize, or how is that done?
Yeah, that basically you're wanting to assess the risk that pose the most danger for your organization. And so you might, I'll give an example. I'm from Kansas, and tornadoes are a huge threat in Kansas. So a lot of families had storm shelters. Here in Colorado, tornadoes, if we have one, it's not going to be very serious. So identify the threats that pose the most danger, and then of those, figure out which ones will have the greatest impact on your business. So what you're doing is focusing on the medium to high risk, medium to high impact risks, and focusing on those, and not addressing the low impact, low risk.
Great. Well, thanks, Laurel. That was great. And we're going to have some time for some more questions for Laurel at the end of the presentation here, when we'll have about 15 minutes or so we can stay on. But right now, I'd like to turn things over to Lisa Jackson.
Oh,
and she's
I do have a couple more slides.
Oh, I'm sorry, Laurel. Didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
That's okay. We're easing in on the end. Your recovery strategy. Closing your doors is not the last step. A carefully crafted recovery strategy is critical and will help your company remain viable long term. You've got to stop the dominoes from falling midstream, and that's your recovery strategy. For some of you, the recovery strategy is all about stopping further damage to your business. Others are looking to resume operations after a complete shutdown. But everybody on this call wants to make sure their organization is viable on the back end. As we talked about earlier, we all face a new normal, and it could be an opportunity to transform your products and services, reinvent your business, come out stronger on the other side. And if you do have people working from home who have capacity, get them involved in the recovery strategy. They could be creating SOPs for their business unit, engage them in finding solutions because they do want to help. It can also reduce their anxiety and stress knowing that they're part of the solution. And then lastly, the real value of this process is creating a mindset, as Dr. Patty Ann mentioned, And this is a mindset for business continuity. During the 2009 swine flu outbreak, I was part of a team that coordinated the nationwide response for Coleman Natural Foods. Years later, we were threatened with a union strike in California and were able to pull out our business continuity plan. And luckily, we were already prepared to continue operations. To wrap up quickly, the pandemic response team is responsible for risk management. It's appropriate to discuss which risk poses the most danger, evaluate the impact to your core business, and figure out a plan to mitigate the potential exposure and control the downside. If you do have questions, please, as Sam mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Laurel. Our next speaker is Lisa Jackson, who's going to speak about cultural agility and in a rapid changing times that we have today. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hey, Sam, thank you. I appreciate that. We are definitely in an unusual time in business, and the culture piece today, I'm actually going to broaden the lens a bit in terms of how I approach this topic around the current circumstances in society. But I also want to begin by saying what is so important right now from leaders is that compassion and empathy to understand that people are facing loss. They're facing loss potentially within their families and their circle of colleagues and friendships. They may be facing loss of just the comfort of coming into an office every day and the change of routines, not being able to, my client in New York has a lot of their employees are working obviously from home, but they're working in very small spaces with maybe an 800 square foot apartment if they're lucky, and they've got 3 kids that just came home and are being homeschooled. So there's a lot of empathy that you're going to reflect the truth of the culture that you've built in a time like this. And I want to just kind of make that note right out of the gate. And that there are 3 things, and I'm not going to talk about these particular 3 things in this webinar, but there are 3 things that you may want to make a note of that you need to do as leaders in order for you to be able to manage through this. And the first is clarity. The second is clarity about the mission, clarity about the purpose of the business right now. The second is confidence in the future. So as Dr. Patty Ann talked about earlier, that really alleviates the anxiety factor for people. If you can just continue to point people toward when this is over, this is what life will be like, and a lot of communication. So I'm going to broaden the lens around this topic of cultural agility. This is a theme that I'm working on in my business, and I do a lot of keynotes on this, the sort of revolution of work. And cultural agility before COVID came along, organizations across a lot of industries have been adapting their culture to a global economy that's driven by rapid, massive change. And the pandemic has sped up this process quite a bit. So agility is the ability to align people to external forces of change with speed and intention. Cultural agility is about cultivating 3 habits, and that is the ability to be change-centric, treating change as a capability, building your capacity for ongoing rapid change in your organization and at your team level, and then really dismantling the over-focus on strict hierarchy to become more team empowered. Especially in large companies, hierarchy is just too slow. And so smart companies are really creating autonomous business structures to navigate change. And the third bit is open communication. So really providing technology tools that support rapid, ongoing, real-time communication that aren't dependent on meetings. And things like Slack, Google Hangouts, Zoom, like we're doing here, Microsoft Teams. This is the time to be looking at making sure that you're supporting people with the technology tools. A lot of my clients are like, yeah, we think the virtual work thing is really important and great, but we don't have the technology to support it. So maybe you're not thinking about the future of work. Maybe you're not thinking about cultural agility, and this is a little bit of an abstract concept, but I want to just make you aware that we just hit the accelerator from car to rocket ship on the speed of change with this pandemic. And there, I was listening to a Mercer was giving a webinar yesterday, and they talked about how the employee experience now that you're creating right now will literally ripple into your life and organization for years to come. And you do need to manage. So much of what I see is companies that are managing with relics of the past as if those are going to apply to the future. And that's really the big mistake that we need to avoid, is overusing hierarchy and top-down directives. Even though at this time people are looking for leaders to provide guidance, there's just a lot of systems, strategies, and structures that need to change in order for you to be able to embrace the idea of cultural agility, even while right now you're leading in the present with that focus on that compassion and empathy. So I want to just, before I dive into the 3 tools that I'm going to offer you today, I want to just give you a couple of frames around statistics that truly support the need for you to focus broader lens on something bigger than just what's happening today in the moment. So this is a graphic that was produced by Deloitte, and they're showing here, summarizing an interesting dynamic and how businesses are poised to respond to change. Technology is innovating, obviously, in ever quicker cycles, and cutting across industries, disrupting entire industries. And individuals are generally the fastest to adapt and keep pace with that technology change overall. We see that with a whole entire generation. Like if you have kids under the age of 20, you see them, they just think like they're sort of intuitive about technology in a way that I still have to read the manual. So a lot of the individual is not, and what's not caught up as fast as business. They lag behind the rate of technology and individual change. And this is really felt, especially among younger generations who want to work in businesses that are built for the digital age. And that is still playing a little bit of catch up. Of course, public policy, we can all see in the way our government operates, lags quite a bit behind in terms of their ability to change. The corona pandemic, and by the way, if technology, anytime, an external force is outpacing our capacity to change, it's a recipe for extinction. And this is something that all businesses should be taking very seriously, is the ability to use this time to sharpen your saw around your ability and capacity to lead change. And it will expose all of the weaknesses in your culture around that, for sure. But it's a really good time as leaders to be looking through that lens. Interesting little example here, factories in China who prioritize the move to automation are actually more easily able to return to production right now because the need for the human sterilized environments is lower than those that rely only on human workers. And I also heard this little interesting anecdote. The Israel-based warehouse automation company Kaiha Robotics said it has seen a 25 to 30% increase in inbound inquiries about its technology in the past month. This drive for automation is going to accelerate. So the second problem that I wanted to just talk about a little bit is, this is a McKinsey survey of 2,135 companies. This was done just about a year and a half ago. And maybe it was 2 years ago. I'm not sure, I don't have the exact date in front of me, but the shortcut, this revealed that this is self-reported for these respondents, that organizational culture is the biggest barrier to company success in the digital age. And they focused on 3 things: the inability to break down department silos, a fear of taking risk, and difficulty forming and acting on a single view of the customer. And these are at the very heart of this pandemic. So cultural agility is about ensuring that you have a company-wide view of your culture and of your customer, and organizing around that to collaborate across communities and identify smart versus intolerable risks. A simple example we can all appreciate right now is the food service industry. Took about less than 48 hours for the restaurant industry in Denver here, whereas I am residing, to rally and start advertising on DoorDash and Grubhub and Uber Eats. These are apps I've been using for years, but now restaurants, to stay open, are offering curbside takeout for the safety of customers. But it doesn't come without risk. And this is something that I really appreciate what Laurel was talking about just really thinking through what are the things that you can do to take the risk out of the reality of what we're dealing with as a community, of a human community, in terms of just living our daily lives. And I think that so many so much of the time with this idea of culture being this big barrier, this is exposing the ways in which we can all be looking through a much bigger picture lens about the experience that we're creating, not only for our employees, but for our end user customers as well. So I want to throw this idea out to you that you have a choice to change. And I love how Dr. Patty Ann talked about this, and as well as Laurel, about the idea that you don't want to wait to change when the event starts, but that you're looking for the choice to change as something that is ongoing and continuous. And my experience, I think it's wise to consult experts in times of great change. And I've been doing this research for a number of years about how nature has been managing change for millions of years before humans made it a field of study and practice. And so I'm going to share with you three, it may seem like metaphors, but these are very directly applicable ideas of what happens in the natural world when change is occurring, that will be able to help you inform the efforts that you make in your cultural change as an organization. It may actually come as no surprise to you that nature is undergoing its own version of revolution. Scientists agree our planet is in the midst of its 6th mass extinction of plants and animals, about 10,000 times the background rate, where literally dozens of species are going extinct every day. And how does this nature manage extreme conditions that evolve or die quickly? One of them is, really, in nature, there is no steady state. Change is literally the one constant. And it's really, I think, in organizational life, points to the ability to pivot and the ability to constantly adapt and to be in a mindset that you're always experimenting with the change process and making small changes and making small adaptations, because this is what overcomes this giant resistance to change that often happens when a large-scale change initiative is rolled out top-down. So this idea of pivoting, in nature, it's known as genetic variance. For example, a species with high genetic variance, which practices constant little tweaks to its DNA structure, is more immune to a virus. This was a literal example in an Oregon big cat breeding colony where cheetahs pretty much practice low genetic variance as a species, whereas lions are really high genetic variance. And when this virus came through, it wiped out most of the cheetah population. None of the lions even had symptoms. So there's a reality to organizations that wanting to survive and not face extinction, you have to embrace the reality of constant change by practicing small adaptations on a frequent basis. You know, with an entire country and world shifting to remote work, external change was sort of rapid, overnight sweeping, and how you maintain business operations while navigating change does feel a little bit like building the airplane engine while you're flying it. If you have a company with rigid top-down structures or a history of failed change or flavor of the month repetitive change initiatives, it's going to be harder for you to make those meaningful shifts than if you've really created a context. I have a client that I work with in the Bronx in New York. They're in the healthcare industry. They shifted 90% of their employees from their office to remote work within a week. This was about 3 weeks ago. And in spite of the fact that they had no precedent for this, most of the employees, 95% of them, worked in the office every day. They had no IT capability, so their VPN system was non-existent at this point. They didn't skip a beat on performance and productivity measures. They initiated a weekly management team roll call, virtual conference call, to ensure all measures of business health have been maintained. And a lot of this was due in large part to the culture work that has been cultivated for the past 2 years that focused on collaboration across the business. So all these managers now know each other. They're not just meeting for the first time on a remote call, building confidence in their ability to survive very turbulent time in their business, which is via a common rallying cry: we are strong. So the remedy for lesson number 1 about the constancy of change is clarity. And no more is there a time than now for you to develop what Patrick Lencioni, if you know his body of work, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, calls a temporary rallying cry. So what is our purpose right now? What is the most important rallying cry that we can center around? And how can we use it as an opportunity to accelerate necessary changes in how we work and our business longer term? And of course, coming back to that idea of showing compassion and empathy for people who are struggling, who are most vulnerable to the changes, maybe having some of the trouble adapting. So lesson number 2 in nature is simplify. So nature, one extraordinary lesson from nature is the power of simplified rules or principles. I use this one a lot because it's so easy to understand. Water always seeks its own level. This is not a metaphor. This is a physical law. It applies regardless of convenience or the impact on humans or our homes. And in times of stress and change, people need simplified structures and processes. I think if you have already done the work around core values and have really embedded those into people's hearts and minds, that is where you need to return to. And rather than a lot of strict rules or blanket bureaucracy kind of responses to what must be done. And I'm not, by the way, suggest there are certain industries like the healthcare industry and hospitals where strict protocols are really important. But what I'm suggesting here is that if you can operate via a few simpler rules in times of great change, it makes a lot more sense to people to keep moving. One of those examples is collaborate before decide. So we don't make decisions without at least collaborating with 3 other people. That could be one example of a simplified principle. Teams over hierarchy. I referred to that before. So empowering teams and their managers who are good doing good work and knowing how customers need you in today's challenges creates an opportunity to pivot a little bit more quickly. Hire is a really interesting example. Chinese, I think they're the world's largest appliance company right now. And there was a Harvard Business Review article on them, and they're spelled H-A-I-E-R. You can Google Hire, Harvard Business Review article. It was from last fall, I believe. And it's a very powerful story of how they're eliminating bureaucracy within their organization and how they're setting up these very independent business units that are quick moving and very autonomous in order to deliver results. And they've grown just by leaps and bounds, both from a profitability standpoint, but also from a market share standpoint. And the third one that I want to offer as a simplified rule is small change. This is what I referred to earlier as genetic variance in nature, but it's really that growth model from Carol Dan Dweck that looks at constant experimentation and constantly looking at ways to experiment and tinker with new ways of working, especially via remote media. I think there's probably some rock stars out there in your organization that could really help teach all of your organization how to work better through remote means. It's really been probably the singular focus on my client in the Bronx once I went remote is to be conducting webinars on even just basics about remote virtual etiquette and how to have successful remote meetings. So lesson number 3, renewal after disaster. So when disaster strikes in nature, all elements of the ecosystem are impacted. I use the example here of a fire, a forest fire, and that it's kind of interesting. You might find this interesting to know that the process after a forest fire of renewal is known as ecological succession. First, the wildflowers grow back really fast, which helps regenerate the soil, and that regenerating the soil, this temporary sort of seed-dependent growth of the wildflowers gives way to more drought-resistant grasses. And then the hardy scrub bushes come in from the soil that has been created by the grasses. And then that sort of allows for the conditions for the taller trees to start growing. This process can take years, but each stage of regrowth is dependent on the prior stage being done successfully. And that's kind of the point that I want to make here, that it's the remedy in your renewal stage, and you may be thinking it's a little early, but I think it's not too early to be thinking about what are we going to do to renew our culture, to strengthen our culture, to create a cultural unity in the wake of this. And how you treat, as Mercer said, how you treat your employees today in this situation is not only a reflection of your true culture rather than your stated culture, but it's also going to have ripples for years to come in terms of what people will do and how well they will align themselves and get back to business as usual in some form post-pandemic. One thing that was brought up on the chat that I noticed is remote work is here to stay. The only question is how will you pivot and embrace it? I heard about a Gartner study yesterday, and I think Laurel referred to this as well, that is really revealing. According to this study, nearly 3 out of 4 CFOs surveyed said they plan to move at least 5, but more up to 50% of their workforce offsite permanently which I think is real. It's coming, and I think the commercial real estate industry is going to be in some kind of massive amount of change coming after this is all settling out. It also requires remote work, requires you to rethink how you measure performance, how you measure productivity, work processes. So, and you may be, we're going to go back just one. I want to just wait on that one, Deb. So it's really about how do you allow people to commingle their life, family, and work more seamlessly. This is something that I think is, it's tricky because everybody in our culture has been accustomed to measuring performance through your button seat, right? If you're here at work, we assume you're performing. And that's a really deeply embedded mindset. So having those KPIs and those productivity measures defined, really well defined for people in terms of what productive looks like, makes it so that you can, as leaders, trust your people and not be checking up on them. I had literally one of my my colleagues at the Bronx company I mentioned was really frustrated by the fact that her boss was, had literally set 3 meetings, 1-hour meetings in one day that everybody was command performance to attend. And that turns out to be more about her anxiety. Are you guys actually working? That's something that's, again, deeply embedded. If I can't see you working, and there may be a part of your day that is actually helping your kids do homework or watching Netflix, it could be that that's happening, but we've got to start thinking more in terms of measuring productivity and performance rather than measuring time on the job. So I want to just summarize about the collaboration and communication. When you are coming post-pandemic, looking at ways to create more collaborative kind of conversation about who do we need to become, and also communicating 2 things to your companies. What is the company rallying cry in this pandemic? So what is the mission for now? And also, as leaders, that people staying home and maintaining social distancing is really that important. So you can use fun examples or photos to drive the point home. Even if you're not sick or at risk, you're doing this helps restore our businesses and economy and people to health more quickly. And the next slide just focuses on an invitation to you as a leader to initiate this conversation and time to explore your relationship to change. What is your organization's relationship with the change overall? How ready are you as leaders to embrace constant change? And Laurel, I'm sorry, not Laurel. Debbie, that's the next slide. This one, yeah. And identify the top 3 culture areas of focus to change to strengthen agility principles in your culture. This is a very powerful exercise. I've led a lot of clients through it. And lastly, I'm not going to focus on this. This is something that will be in the downloadable deck, but the next slide is an agile culture cheat sheet. So this is something I'm not going to, as I said, go through today, but I just want to offer it to all of you who are looking a little bit beyond what's happening right now to how can you start building more agility, more of that capacity to embrace change into your culture, and what are some of the skills that are needed in order to do that.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa.
I'm just wanting to skip to the very last slide and just say this. I think all of us have had the opportunity to just sort of speak to the work that we do generally. I am focused, a lot of my practice right now is focused on keynotes, and I'm doing quite a number of in-person keynotes, not anymore. If you would like a virtual keynote for your leadership team or staff, this is something that I do quite often. I've been doing virtual work since 2011 for clients, and so feel free to contact me with the contact information up on the screen. Thank you. I'm finished.
Thanks, Lisa. That was a lot of great information. We do have several questions. But in the matter of time, I'm gonna turn it over to Amy, and we'll take those questions on a little bit later after the call, so if you can hang on there. So Amy, if you could go for that laser legal update, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just going to go quickly through some of the updates. Last week on the call, we had a presentation that was more fulsome on the FFCRA and also the opportunities that are available to small businesses in the CARES Act. Just want to provide a few slides with updates and of course leave us plenty of time for questions. So first thing is that under the FFCRA, the paid sick time and the enhanced FML, the Enhanced Family Medical Leave. The posters are out. There are great fact sheets. There are great updates. And the final regs are out as well. And the FAQs that you see on the screen, I think they're up to about 78 now, really answer almost all of your questions. A couple of quick updates. There were a lot of questions last week and a lot of confusion about the use of intermittent leave, both in terms of the sick leave time and also the extended, that 10 weeks of unpaid care leave for people who have kids at home. You can use intermittent leave only if it's mutually agreed between the employer and the employee. So if you can't come to terms on your employees coming sort of in and out during the workday while they're telecommuting, the employer can decide that intermittent leave does not work either for the sick leave time or for the extended care. And then the other big change with regard to the FFCRA is that an employer can require the employee to use the employer's PTO or sick time only for purposes of either the first 10 days of the unpaid leave portion of the FML, or to top up that 2/3 pay to 100%. So limited use of the employer's PTO and sick leave. Moving on to the enhanced unemployment benefits at the bottom of this slide and then on the next two slides. I just want to let people know that that $600 a week, it's up to 4 months. It's in addition to the state unemployment insurance benefits. Here in Colorado, we provide in unemployment about 55% of an employee's pay. If you are an employee who is under about $50,000, that means that the combination of your Colorado unemployment benefits and the $600 is going to make that employee almost whole. So that's just something to keep in mind. Each state is different in terms of how much they provide in terms of unemployment and how long the unemployment lasts. And of course, we have the additional 13 weeks of UI in Colorado as well. Available soon, but not yet, is unemployment for those that are self-employed and independent contractors. That benefit has not gone live yet in Colorado or in any other state. The next two slides, you can find these on the Colorado Department of Labor website. We've got the URL there on the right, but it's a really nice handy dandy flow chart. I love flow charts in terms of what benefits you can apply for and when you can apply. In Colorado, again, you don't have to do anything additional to apply for that CARES Act supplemental benefit. But as you'll see on the next slide, for self-employed independent contractors, those benefits are not available. You can't apply yet. So just keep checking back with the CDLE website. And then let's go to the slide after that. So moving on to the CARES Act, there's been just a lot of confusion about the payroll protection program. I hate to say it, and a lot of us in the legal community are not surprised that what has been promised has not been delivered. So again, just as a recap, that PPP loan is available for 8 weeks. The way that you calculate it is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs going back to 2019. A lot of things that you can include here: healthcare benefits, retirement contributions, vacation leaves, payroll taxes, salaries only up to $100,000. New clarification: you can't include the 1099 wages or compensation that you pay to your independent contractors. This has gone back and forth, but they've come down on the side as that the 1099 individuals, not employees, the 1099 independent contractors that you may contract with, they can apply for unemployment benefits. They can apply for their own PPP loans. So we can't include them in our payroll costs. The loan forgiveness and deferral, again, they've made some changes here. You can only use up to 25% for non-payroll related costs. So we were given a lot of information that you could use this for mortgages and leases and utilities. But again, because of the flood of requests, they're saying that only 25% can be used for non-labor costs. A lot of confusion around the forgiveness. If a company goes ahead and has either terminated or furloughed employees or reduced payroll costs with salary cuts, either before February or during the time that they get the loan, so basically anytime between February 15th and June 30th, you can avoid having that loan forgiveness reduced if you go ahead and bring those employees back or bring yourself back up to their full salaries. You don't have to bring them back, but as long as they're back on your payroll by June 30th. The CARES Act, the EIDL, that has also been kind of a disaster. So it was promised that there would be these grants that would come 3 days after you applied of up to $10,000. Even if the loan was not ultimately granted. That, of course, has been delayed. We haven't seen anybody actually get the grants yet. But we've also learned that they may be rolling out next week, but the grants are going to be limited to $1,000 per employee up to that $10,000 maximum. So that's a big change. That's not for the loans themselves. That's only for that $10,000 grant. And again, you can have a PPP loan and an EIDL loan as long as it's not for the same reason. And you can combine those when you apply for the PPP loan. And then finally, again, just to remind people that if you're not going for loans, there are other credits that are available to you, payroll retention credits. If you keep your employees and are not going to apply for loans, you can defer the employer's Social Security contributions through December 31st. Those will be payable 50% in 2021, 50% in 2022. And then there's the Employee Retention Credit Program. So those are just some quick updates. I see we probably have some questions already coming in. And I'm happy to answer those because I want to give people an opportunity to get their questions answered.
Great. Well, the first one that's on here says in regards to unemployment, is an employee who has been furloughed at 10 to 25% eligible for any pandemic unemployment benefits?
Yes, the short answer is yes, that if there has been a salary reduction or an hours reduction, then they may be eligible for unemployment benefits and they should be encouraged to apply during the furlough.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry, some of these are in the chat.
Oh, that's okay. I see one other question about somebody who's already exhausted their unemployment benefits, started a new job, and then has either been laid off or furloughed because of COVID. And again, they're being very liberal, and you can apply for renewed unemployment benefits, and you may be eligible for those Enhanced Care Act supplemental benefits.
Okay. And I imagine there's going to be some more specific questions. And so if there's any specific questions, please reach out to Amy and she'll get back to you in answering those. And also we'll try to send them.
May I just ask Amy, if you don't
Sure.
mind? So again, and you may have said this again, since the laws are constantly changing all day, every day. And I know that I know you've been in high demand, right? So, as an attorney. So where's a good resource to get just-in-time updates? Again, you may have said this.
I didn't say that, and it's really hard to find one resource that handles everything. So the big things that we see are questions regarding the CARES Act, and you can go on, you can sort of search on CARES Act, and I look at the Treasury Department, and I also look at the Small Business Association website. And also you want to go onto the Department of Labor's website, and they have all the latest updates on things like the Family Cares Act and those enhanced benefits. And then Unfortunately, for the unemployment, which is again delayed, you're going to want to go onto your state unemployment website. So those are probably the three. And again, in the slides, we have a lot of links to those URLs and websites. So once we have those slides up, people will be able to use those as a resource.
Great, thank you. We can also have a lot of these links in our landing page as we develop that at compteam.net.
Great. So we have a question for Lisa here. So given the pace of change has been so fast. I mean, typically in traditional HR environments and leaders would want to control the amount of change that they think that their workforce can handle at any particular moment in time, and roll out programs and over time. But now, of course, everything's just happened all at once, and we've had to adapt. And so, is there any lessons to be learned here as far as this rapid amount of change and how companies can actually absorb that? Oh, you're on mute, Lisa.
That's always a good thing to unmute myself if I'm talking. I think the biggest is to talk to your people. As I mentioned, I did a Mercer webinar yesterday, and they were doing polls with these questions about what are the biggest concerns that you have right now, what are the biggest issues that you're facing in this, and using that as a jumping off point to just solve the problems one at a time, I think is really what we're in the middle of the change now. So I mentioned before that getting to the point where you start embracing change within your culture as a habit is the ultimate long-term strategy. But with this having come down the pike so fast, don't be making decisions in a boardroom with 5 people, right? Talk to your people and find out what it is that they need from you, and making sure that your leaders are doing that on a very regular basis. Like with the webinars I mentioned I'm doing for remote work, at the end of each one, we're saying what issues do we need to troubleshoot for you personally. So and then in the middle of it, I mean, I think a lot of the basic change management principles that you may have learned or may have installed in your organization still apply. They just need to be utilized in real time rather than spending a lot of time doing rollouts. You're going to be looking for those tools to happen right now in the moment, and don't assume that people have the answers. It's just like what Amy was just talking about. Even she is having to go and figure out where are the credible sources of information, what's the update on a day-to-day basis. And that rapid speed, you're gonna have to probably parking lot some of your more longer term initiatives in favor of that for now.
And what you just mentioned as far as the real-time feedback, I mean, is there ways that companies are getting feedback from their employees in a real-time fashion? What's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, the one is just using polling techniques on even something like this. If you're doing remote meetings, use polling techniques to find out. So develop ahead of time 2 or 3 questions, and I can offer a list of those for the aftermath of this that I can throw up on one of the slides, Debbie. But the questions that really start to get people to answer honestly, you can use them in, as I said, so if they are yes, no questions, that can be a little bit less revealing than if they're open-ended questions, but then you've got to deal with the fact that sometimes people don't want to be identified as somebody who's complaining or someone who is, I'm just going to tough it out. So polling techniques on webinars is a really important one. You can do SurveyMonkey, or if you've got your own internal software, do quick pulse checks. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What do we need to do to support you? What's the biggest concern that you have right now? And then I think thirdly, it's really about showing leadership. I come back to this compassion and empathy piece that, Dr. Patty Ann talked about anxiety. What alleviates anxiety is that leaders express clarity and confidence in the future. And so I think, from a change management standpoint, I don't think there's anything more important than that right now. to just continually coming back to there's a positive future ahead of us. And even if your business has a period of having to, as Shar said, reinvent itself and change the business model, it's not over until it's over. And really stepping into that place of leadership that no matter how grim things look, you've got to show up for your people and show them that there's a next step.
And I would just say one other thing is it's also important to provide individuals, Lisa, with sort of one-on-one avenues to communicate that anxiety or that concern or responding to a poll. Because a lot of times we do have these, group calls, these Zoom calls, and it's the people that are struggling the most that are often the most intimidated by a group setting and by people who are sending out a million memes and who seem to have it all together, that may really be intimidated to sort of move forward and say, I need help. So making sure there is that sort of confidential sort of lane for them to take advantage of, I think is really important. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. One of my, one of the Bronx client that I mentioned, their CFO is doing one-on-ones every day. And that's for that exact reason. And I think it's really, really important.
Okay, I have a question here for Laurel. So there's one, I mean, of course you were talking about business continuity and making sure that we have that recovery plan in place. And it's somewhat easy to do that for your own company, but then in the modern world and working with outsourced firms and companies overseas that we might be outsourcing things to, and what are the practices to ensure that they have their act together when it comes to these things?
Well, keeping in touch with them is the number-one method. And one of the things you want to do is gather all your contact information for anyone, any business partners, any suppliers, vendors, and then also start to develop alternates for those, because chances are they're being hit with their supply chain. They're being hit with the same closures and problems that we're facing with absenteeism, et cetera. So to answer your question, keeping in touch with your business partners and being ready to have a game plan, a plan B.
Great, thank you, Laurel. Another question here: how do you handle leaders who are absent or not providing clear guidance to their teams? Anybody want to take that one? So how do you handle leaders who are absent or not providing clear guidance to their teams?
Well, I'll start with that one, and anyone else wants to chime in on this one. I mean, I'd want to know why. If you're a leader, you're absent. So if they're not, and how you know that, is part of the answer is about how are they absent because they're ill? Are they absent because their mother died? Or are they absent because they're freaked out or they're just taking a vacation? What are the reasons behind it? But I think that it's important, just as what we've been talking about, to get out in front of that one-on-one. And if there is no succession plan where you've got the leader that's truly absent, and then you've got a backup plan in terms of who should step in to provide that clarity and that guidance, you better get in a room and identify who that person is right away, because that's one of the, I think, talk about anxiety on top of anxiety, right? To have your leader not talking, not providing guidance, not providing clarity, that's going to send that team into a massive anxiety scenario.
Yeah.
Get out in front of that one for sure, but it's how too. Is it, do you know through anecdotal information, or is there a real absenteeism that's at work? And that's going to depend, the answer is going to depend somewhat on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been a very big change in environment, of course, with the workforce. I mean, there's been teams that have used to seeing each other on a regular basis, being able to walk to each other's desk and so forth, or be close at hand. and now they're remote and somewhat fragmented. Is there some tips that anybody would offer as far as how these teams could work more closely together and get that sense of being there?
I want to actually address that one because this is something we've been working on with the health plan in the Bronx that I mentioned, and that a couple of really quick things that we've done. Number one is literally having work environments that aren't meetings. So just getting on this is kind of a hangout thing, you know, where we're all doing our own thing, but then somebody pops up at one point and goes, hey, Laurel, I have this question for you, you know, and there's just this kind of comfort to actually having your teammates nearby. The other, and that seems a little weird at first, but don't discount it. It actually can be a really powerful tool. Is have lunch together, schedule a virtual happy hour. Make sure you know your team members' birthdays and that they get acknowledged. So really building in the social structure that is absent because people aren't just hanging out at the water cooler, but ensuring that you're building in time for that within not only your formal meetings, but also just the way that you're working, encouraging and promoting and really developing the expectation that people are doing more of that organic communication rather than it all being meeting based.
Mm-hmm. Great. One of the things that one of my clients are doing, and actually my wife is a teacher, so she's doing this as well. They have virtual office hours. So basically, I mean, people may know that you can keep Zoom running even if you're the only one on it, and then participants can drop in and ask questions. It may be a student or a worker. They can just drop in, drop out, and be able to. Freedom of knowing when you're going to be available to answer those questions can be very helpful.
That's really cool.
Really good advice.
I like that.
I'm wondering, Sam, do we want to wrap up with some of the aspects of the closing and then keep this open a little bit longer for additional questions since we're out of time?
That's a good idea, Shar. Thanks for keeping me on task. And so, yeah, because I was so much into the conversation, I forgot all about that. So. Anyway, so and for those that are listening, that we've discussed a lot of items here, and we're going to have this entire presentation as well as the recording on compteam.net. So you'll be able to go there, and there's some additional resources there that you might find helpful as well. In addition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a registration link for the next presentation that we'll have next week. And if you have some thoughts on what you would like to see on that presentation, please let us know. One topic that we have in mind right now, we're talking to Godera, which is they do volunteer work and so forth. And then they want to come on and talk about how they are re-engaging the workforce to empower them with how to give back to their communities instead of being just trapped at home. And so that's going to give the workforce and your employees a way to actually reach out and not feel like a victim in this particular situation. So a lot of good stuff to come. And I'll have that this video processed and loaded to the website in about 24 hours or so, probably about 48. But anyway, also, if you like what you saw here today, please share this experience on your social networks so we can get more attendees. And thank you for attending. Shar, did I miss anything that you would like to add?
No, I think that last time we realized that it was good to kind of hang on a little bit if there's any additional follow-up questions. I know that Amy had many, so are we sure we were able to address all the questions in the Q&A that we can see? Amy, did you see any other ones?
I see one new one, and it's a question from somebody who said that they are considered essential, so they're an essential employer in the industry, and they have an employee who's decided not to come to work. And so, what are the legal rights and responsibilities there? So, just as in sort of the virtual world or the real world, if we have an employee who is not showing up for work, we would reach out to them and we would counsel them with regard to their attendance. Again, it's possible that they may be subject to quarantine or unable to come to work because of COVID-related issues, and they may be eligible for the new sick time benefits. If they don't claim that, if they just don't feel sort of safe or they just don't want to come to work, then it would be kind of a regular no show, no call type of situation, whatever your policies would require. I wouldn't go outside of the norm. I would sort of look at handbooks, look at how you've treated other employees who have not showed up for work. If you do have work for them and they don't show up and then they go ahead and apply for unemployment, they will not be eligible, and they may not be eligible for the sick time if there's another way for them to work. So if they can telework or do something else. So sick time is available if they're unable to work because of certain enumerated situations.
Yes, and would you also recommend timesheets?
I mean, we're recommending timesheets in any situation, and particularly with the telework situation for our hourly employees. They should be submitting timesheets anyway because it's required by state and federal law. We want them to make sure that they're still taking their meal breaks and their lunch breaks. And we also want to make sure that they're actually getting paid for their hours worked, and that we understand that they may be working fewer hours because of childcare responsibilities or they're working from home, but that we expect our employees to honestly record and accurately record their hours.
Excellent. Excellent point.
Okay, for anyone that's listening out there, if you would like to actually join in the call and talk online here, you can just raise your hand and I can bring you into the call so you can ask your question live instead of typing it in.
Yeah. So as you're looking at that, Lisa and I were having some excellent conversation yesterday in regards to performance. On a personal note, my company, I was having some issues with performance before this thing hit with a few of my employees. And then when it hit at the end of March, boy, did that, I would say it brought a huge awareness to me that perhaps my former strategies related to talent management were not necessarily as applicable at this time. And then I had to start looking at my values. So I love what you were saying, Lisa, because we were talking yesterday about when you're looking at your performance of your company, it's important to assess what truly is happening in this day and time. And then going back to being fully aware of the circumstances in all aspects of the culture, and then aligning to the new direction, and then helping everybody be more adaptable into that transitional state is, I think, what we were talking about yesterday. Correct? It's mainly about having some type of methodology to help you kind of lead in the chaos, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is what we were talking about. And I think I just want to acknowledge that this will, I think, shake out some people that probably aren't a match for your core values. And that was certainly a part of the conversation that we had. And that can be really unfortunate and difficult timing, but it's a very important leadership moment, to actually decide if your core values are real. And are you going to make people decisions based on them in this time and in regular times? It turns out to be really important. It's not, values aren't posters on the wall, for sure.
And to Laurel's presentation, talking about sustainability of the business, those that aren't going to be a good match may not be adaptable to the new virtual environment that the organization has to go to sustain. That's also a big aha, at least me personally with my company. So all very vital.
And then, of course, it may seem obvious, but when we're looking at performance and metrics that we've been tracking over the year, or what we planned to achieve this year, and just like any other shock in the marketplace, it's important to relook at those metrics to see what is reasonable given this new environment, and also given what your employees are experiencing. I mean, there was a question earlier, the fact that managers potentially micromanaging or wanting to make sure that people are actually working when they're at home. I mean, this is a time for us to relax a little bit and give a little bit of space, allow people to adjust, not only for their own mental sanity, but to keep them and retain them in the future. Because like everyone, we're all stressing and finding how to adapt in this new environment. So we need to allow time for that.
Well said. 100% agree with that.
And also adapting the competencies and skill sets. I think when we're working virtually, I myself included have had some challenges with my glitchy computer or my technologies, and realizing, oh man, I might not be the best at the administrative side of this, and really relying on my talent and my team to maybe pick up some of those assignments. It just takes a little bit to adapt. But like, I agree, Sam, relax a bit. You know, our staff isn't going to be working full 8-hour days, 100%. They're going to have to tend to their kids or tend to their family.
Well, and again, just to build on that particular point, that the work, when work gets done, how it gets done, where it gets done, you know, we're entering into a phase of employee expectation around that it shouldn't matter as long as the business is open and as long as the performance metrics are met. And so I think it's important to acknowledge both of what you just said. Let's have some empathy, let's have some compassion, let's relax a little bit, but also let's use this as an opportunity to redefine what performance means in terms of an employee's productivity. Rather than having it just be, you have to get your work done between 8 and 5. Is there an opportunity for that person is a night owl? After dinner, they go back and they do a couple hours worth of work, you know, so just being willing to have that flexibility, that's the number one thing the millennial generation wants. And they're going to be looking for this to be a signal that reality has just arrived.
And I'll just be the devil's advocate to that because you've got the lawyer on the call. I think the concern there that I would raise is that when employees see one person doing that, they automatically assume that everybody can do that. And that's just not the case. You know, every position is different. Some employees, as Lisa says, it's okay if they're coding or they're engineering at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. Your receptionist or your sales and marketing team, you know, not so much. So, and the issue with sort of this creating the perpetual or like, oh, we all like working from home and nobody's coming into the office anymore, is that not every position lends itself to that. And so when we've been sending people home, working from home, all of the documentation that I have been sort of reviewing or providing to my clients is, you know, this is temporary. This is because of COVID-19. We're, you know, once the office is back open, we're expecting you to come, you know, to come back to your desk, and that, you know, telework is on a case-by-case basis. And I leave it to my clients and people like Lisa and Laurel and Debbie to soften that message. But that's like the basic message.
Well, may I say also, a lot of us don't remember what day of the week it is. So I don't mean to sound that way, but I have had staff that actually didn't realize, totally missed a webinar meeting or a Zoom, because it's like all blending together. So you have to have some compassion, but you're absolutely right. We obviously document that they're not attending certain meetings that they're required to come to.
I want to just address something, Amy, really important about what you said, which is, I don't think when I said remote work is here to stay, I don't think it should be 100% of the time, because people still need to be in contact with each other in real time in order for them to have. There's a lot of other needs that are met by that. And some of these obviously are defined by the job itself, right? If you're in retail or you're in a job where your physical presence is required. But I do think it's here to stay as an expectation that there be some flexibility with it. And it's going to require a whole lot of rule defining. And it's been kind of on my mind, what are some of the legal sides of that? That if a group of people gets to go out and do remote work permanently, you're going to have a whole lot of other people raising their hands and going, why not me? So it's going to get into sticky territory, I think, for sure.
Agreed.
I can relate to that as well. I mean, there's, as far as before the pandemic happened, I mean, there was already a trend that the remote work was highly desired in the employee value proposition. Right. And now it's just going to be an expectation. If you don't have it in your policies, or if you're not able to provide it in some fashion, you're not going to be looked at as competitive. So, I mean, of course, certain jobs are more able to work remote than others. Of course, I understand that, but for a lot of those jobs, it'll be that way.
interesting time.
I will say that Sam and myself, we have had millennials, younger generation, actually find me on LinkedIn, and we're having very robust conversations about cultural and people's strategy changes. And this epidemic is going to demand change, and the mindset of our executive leaders and HR leaders is definitely need to listen and pivot and transition our sales. And I think this time more than ever is going to demand that in order to attract, retain our talent is definitely going to need this. So I am so appreciative of our speakers today. You guys are just phenomenal and have done a phenomenal job. And I just so appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. HR with a heart, you guys are awesome.
Thank you for
pleasure.
providing
Thank
such a great
you.
forum for this conversation. It's been really great listening to all of you. You have different perspectives. I'm off. Take care, everyone.
Great.
Hey.
Thank
All
you.
right, be safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're about 11:48. I also have to jump off now. So thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
And Debbie, I'll send out, or Laurel, Debbie, I'll send out an appointment for a follow-up debrief.
Okay.
Okay? Because we usually do a debrief. So later.
Take care.
Sounds
All right.
all
Thank you.
right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.